item number 25, Affordable Housing Deep Dive, presentation on planning and the development process. And I will yield to my honorable at-large colleague, Councilmember Caballero.
Thank you so much, Mayor Pro Tem. Good to see you, Sarah. I'll pass it over to you.
All right, let me get this rolling for you. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Mayor Pro Tem, honorable members of council. I'm Sara Young, Director of the City County Planning Department. It's my pleasure to be with you this afternoon to walk you through planning and the development process, which can be a nebulous and frustrating thing. And so I'm going to try and break it down as best I can. But I want to start off first with a quick disclaimer and an acknowledgement. The disclaimer is that some of the information I'm going to be presenting to you today, you already know, right? But I am sharing it for the benefit of the viewing and listening public to make sure that they have a full context of the process. And the acknowledgement is that I have a lot of folks from other departments here with me today, depending on how deep you want the deep dive to be. I may need to call on some additional resources. I've got folks from City Public Works, City Transportation, County Erosion Control. I may be missing somebody. Our attorney's office is here as well. So with that, I want to start off first talking a bit about the Development Services Center. The DSC, as we lovingly call it, and y'all know that us planners, we love some acronyms, so I'll try and make sure to define them as we go. But the Development Services Center was opened about almost 5 years ago. Its main focus was really to be the initial point of entry for the public, for the development community, to be able to walk through the development process. It's evolved quite a bit since then. Mostly because of the pandemic. We had on our strategic plan the idea that we would, over a 3-year period, segue into a completely digital process for submittal, review, payment, permit issuance, et cetera. And what we had planned to do in 3 years, the pandemic forced us to do in 3 weeks. So that really changed our operations significantly. Now the main customer base that use our Development Services Center is really folks that are not design professionals. They don't have any real experience and have questions about, something they want to do. So typically, the folks that we help in Development Services Center, they come to us, they know they want to do something, they don't know what it takes to do it. And they don't need to know the questions to ask. It's our job to connect the dots, to share with them the process involved, how long it's going to take, what materials they need to submit, how it's going to work, what it's going to cost, all of that, so they don't have to figure it out. And we do that right now. The center is staffed jointly by planning and inspections. Inspection staff is also here. I forgot to mention them earlier. But it is really intended to be kind of the first point of contact for lay people that don't understand the development process. And it's our job to help them. Because like I said, it is a little bit complicated. So from a process standpoint, one of the things that is fundamental is at the entry point for anybody, what do they want to do on their property, right? And we often get questions from folks in the community, well, who gets to decide? So we start with, what do you want to do? Does the zoning allow that, yes or no? If the zoning allows it, and you can follow all the zoning rules, then that's what's called a by right administrative approval. Now, sometimes these by right approvals also may have some extra special standards that you have to meet, and so there could be an added quasi-judicial process, and I'm going to talk a little bit more briefly about some of these things. Now, if the zoning doesn't allow what someone wants to do, then of course that puts them into the realm of a rezoning process, which is a legislative approval through you all. Legislative approvals, as you know, are discretionary. They're things like rezonings, annexations, plans, ordinances. Quasi-judicial approvals are evidentiary, so whereas you as council have a lot of leeway in a legislative action to approve or not approve it, in a quasi-judicial setting, there are very specific standards that need to be met. Examples of some of those types of approvals are things like variances, use permits, certificates of appropriateness, and Typically, these approvals are carried out by the Board of Adjustment, the Historic Preservation Commission, and sometimes you all as well. And then lastly here is administrative approvals, or our administrative approvals. These are non-discretionary, and they're carried out primarily by staff. The purpose of these approvals is a bit different. It is just to verify compliance. So there's no discretion on the part of staff in these approvals, right? If someone submits a site plan, for instance, we're required to verify they meet all the standards. If they meet all the standards, by state law, we have to approve it. That also means that if someone refuses to comply with the standards, we can't waive. We don't have authority to waive a standard. That would put them in a process like a variance, right? Under a discretionary process that's allowed through state law. So a lot of times folks will get really frustrated with an administrative approval because they want us to bend the rules and we really can't, or they feel like it shouldn't be a discretionary approval. It should be something, everything should go before the city council, right? And to give you a little context, just planning alone processes over 7,000 discrete approvals every year. You all as a council, you might see 70, right? There's a big difference. And so state law creates these administrative approvals for the sake of efficiency. You all can't possibly handle that volume of approvals. And so through the ordinance, you delegate to staff the ability to handle those essentially on your behalf. All right, so I want to talk a little bit more, segue kind of into the development process itself and some of the parts. And this kind of linear spectrum, if you will, while it kind of shows things in sequence, I want you to know that some of these things are not necessarily sequential, right? And not everyone needs to hit each and every one of these steps. It depends on what folks may want to do with their property, whether, like I said earlier, they have the zoning they need or not. The things above the arrow, above the line, are the discretionary things that involve you all or quasi-judicial process. And you'll notice that the things below the line, those are all the administrative things. And they're not all the administrative things. They're just the main ones that you are likely to hear about. There's lots of other, smaller, teeny tiny things like sign permits, for instance, right? So the other thing important about this is that each one of these represents a review cycle. Someone submits an application for any one of these things. Staff reviews it. For the things that are discretionary, there's an agenda process to get it to the right body for them to consider it and make a decision. For the administrative things, there may be multiple review cycles. And each one of those is kind of a self-contained thing. So you can see how this is starting to kind of pile on, right? In addition to that, and I'll flip to the next slide, this has the same, most of the same, I think, processes, and it has the main departments that are the lead agencies for carrying out those processes. However, and sorry for the neck turning, but it's a lot of words to try and get on there for you. So these lead agencies, they are not the sole departments involved in these processes, right? I'll use site plans as an example. Planning may be the lead on a site plan, but we have over 20 other departments and agencies that participate with us in the review of a site plan. So a lot of these departments are involved, even though they may not be the lead, they're involved in multiple processes throughout the life of a project. All right, so I'm going to start segueing a little bit out of the nitty-gritty details of all the little development review roles and talk a little bigger picture roles that set the stage for things in the development review process, particularly how some of these groups that you all know are either involved in or hear about work with each other. So I want to start first with the planning department. We already talked about how we handle administrative reviews and we provide customer service, but the other big component that we contribute to the development process is we are your main folks that draft plans, policies, regulations for you all to enact, adopt, et cetera. There is also the Joint City-County Planning Committee, which 3 of you serve on, along with 3 county commissioners and the chair of the Planning Commission. This is an advisory body, and the purpose of that body is to provide guidance to the planning department on matters of joint jurisdictional interest, right? We have a joint department, a joint planning function through an interlocal between the city and the county, and I'm sure I don't have to, it's an understatement to say there are things that need to be ironed out sometimes, right? We need to get on the same page with our partners at the county, and so this gives us a venue to do that. It also provides kind of the first line of guidance to staff on planning projects. We then have the Planning Commission, who is another advisory body, but one that is very different from the JCCPC, as we like to call them. This is an advisory body that you all appoint. It has 14 members, and by state law, we're required to have a Planning Commission if we have zoning in general, right? Their role is to hold public hearings and make a recommendation to you all and to the county commissioners for county cases on rezonings, long-range plans, ordinance changes, those things. But as opposed to JCCPC, they do not provide guidance to staff directly, right? They're just part of a public hearing process. And then, of course, there's you all. You are the policymakers. You create you enact the regulations. You have, your legislative powers for approvals, et cetera. And as I mentioned, you appoint members to these bodies, which is really important. So, talking about policy and regulations, I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about the difference between those things, because I think sometimes, I know I spend a lot of time explaining to community members what we mean when we say something is policy versus something is regulatory. As you know, policies are non-binding, they're aspirational, right? They're the things that we would like to see happen in the future. Their purpose is to guide, but not dictate. There's no enforcement of policies. They can certainly help the city set priorities, and they really should reflect community vision, and that is a lot of what our engagement efforts are aimed at. In contrast, regulations, those are things that are legally binding. Once it's on the books, it's got to be met, okay? It's essentially a law. Their purpose is intended to implement plans, although I think sometimes, we miss the mark. Sometimes there's things we don't, we can't necessarily do through a law. Sometimes our policies are bigger, farther reaching than just a land use ordinance. Our particular regulations deal with kind of 2 aspects: standards, what you have to do, how something is designed, and the process, how it is that you get that design approved. And it also includes enforcement mechanisms. So, kind of digging in a little bit further in terms of examples. Adopted plans, we have the comprehensive plan. We have a series of open space plans. We have some corridor plans, some small area plans. We even have historic preservation plans, right? Anything that is visionary looking into the future. In terms of regulations, I think of these as kind of 2 buckets. One is codes and ordinances, things like the city code, our unified development ordinance, and the zoning map, which is technically part of the UDO. Things like the local review criteria, building code. And then we also have what I call industry standards, right? Like the reference guide for development. So these are not codified in an ordinance, they're referenced in an ordinance. And so we use them as kind of our best industry standards to help us apply some real fine level details that are not in the ordinance, like construction specifications, that kind of thing. All right, so an example of how all these things kind of intertwine. So for instance, there may be a policy in the comp plan or some other plan that says design streets to be safe for all users, right? So how do we translate that into a regulation? Well, we may have regulations that talk about, how wide the travel lane needs to be, whether or not we're going to allow, on-street parking or a bicycle lane, and we may have graphics that illustrate how all that works together, right? That's how one kind of evolves into the other. Now, I'm wrapping up, and I'm trying to get through this fairly quickly because I feel like there's probably a lot of questions, but policy-wise, the comprehensive plan, the new plan that we're working on has kind of 4 main areas, right? One is goals and objectives, which the council has already adopted. The other is a place type map and guide. You all are used to currently, we talk about the future land use map when you see rezoning requests. In the new iteration of the comprehensive plan, the future land use map will be replaced by a place type guide. Same idea. But it will describe the different types of uses in very general, broad categories and where it is envisioned that they will come to be realized on the ground in our community. It also has, or will have, a series of policies, just like the old plan did. And these are recommendations for how it is that we're going to reach those goals and objectives that were laid out. And then the last thing, which is really important, is it will contain a series of action items and an implementation framework. And up until now, everything that I've just talked about, the goals and objectives which were adopted, the draft map, and the draft policies, those are available online. I know most of you know that. The implementation framework and the action items is something that we're working on now and will be released with our next release, the final release that I'll talk about in a minute. Those are where we're going to detail essentially all the homework assignments, the things that we need to do, whether it be projects, new programs, research, what have you, to try and implement the policies that are in the plan. And then the implementation framework is basically the assignment list. Who's lead on what? Who needs to be involved? What resources are needed to do some of those things? So that's big picture, kind of what the comprehensive plan covers. Now, big picture, what the Unified Development Ordinance covers, and I know Don O'Toole, I think, talked about this a little bit in his presentation last time. The UDO, it codifies two things, basically: administrative procedures, how processes work, how the type of application you need, the responsibilities of different entities, public notice requirements, how we do enforcement. It also, and more importantly, I think, codifies development standards. This is the part that people care about the most, which is what do you actually have to do, right? What are the rules for development? Most of them are organized by zoning district, and they cover all sorts of things, including, the use, what you can do on the property, the building size, scale, mass, site design, where you put parking, and environmental protection, the things that are really concerning to a lot of folks. They seem to never be convinced that we've done, that they're covered in the ordinance, but we have several chapters devoted to a variety of different environmental protections built into the ordinance. So it's not just land use, it's also an environmental ordinance as well. So I want to wrap up kind of the formal part of the presentation with a bit of an update on where we are with these two really important documents that guide development in Durham. The comprehensive plan, the full draft will be available in January. We're going to start our final round of community engagement in January. We hope to be at Planning Commission to start the public hearing process with them in February. We are not quite sure how long that will take. And unlike a rezoning request, the Planning Commission is not bound by law to move this item along by any certain deadline. So, we're anticipating that it will likely be with them for a few months, but we're not 100% sure. We would like to be able to get this to you all and the county commissioners in a joint hearing for adoption in the summer. So that's what we're shooting for. But as exciting as it is to wrap up a new comprehensive plan, I'm even more excited about the next phase, which is a complete rewrite of our Unified Development Ordinance. And that's needed for a variety of reasons. One is, we're going to have a new place type map that requires new zoning districts that implement it. It requires lots of other changes, regulatory changes to implement a lot of the policies. And so we will be issuing an RFP for a couple of things, and we thought we were going to do this separately, but I think we're probably going to end up doing this together, is this winter looking for a consultant to basically take a deep dive at our ordinance, tell us, what is keeping us from meeting the policies in the comp plan? What are the hurdles in the ordinance? What are the things that need to be deconstructed and reconstructed? And then start drafting that. So the first phase will likely be kind of a deep dive into the ordinance to see all the things that are wrong with it, that could be better, that we would like to see changed, and then the rewrite will start from that. So with that, I know that was a lot of really fast talking, which I apologize for, but I wanted to make sure that I got through it and you all had time for questions.
Open up to questions. Any colleagues have any questions? I'm going to start with Councilmember Freeman, and I'll just go down.
And thank you, Sarah. This is phenomenal to actually present and share with the public in this format. And I think it's long overdue. I'm so thankful that you've put it together. I would add that, or just ask if you could add some dates to some of the slides, because I think it's helpful for folks to understand how long some of the items have been outstanding, especially in that one slide where you're talking about the comp plan. And I would say that it's important to also note that we live in a Dillon rule state, and so many of the things that we request are voluntary, whereas in other states it might not be. And I think it's important to note that the policy that prevents sound planning and zoning based on a meticulous eye for those types of details creates opportunities to incorporate resident requests, listening to concerns raised by residents, and then trying to make sure we're avoiding critical harms that we know have been a part of development for, thousands. Just thinking about chemicals in general and how they're used. There's just been some changes that we kind of have to account for. And so I know just even talking about the way in which we're setting up the berms or setting up different ways to prevent, runoff, those are all things that are happening like real time. And so we cannot, nothing is static. And I really want to express like over and over again, nothing is static. And so what we know in 2022 may be different in 2023. And that's important in this policy development conversation, so that the policies have to be alive. It's not something that can just sit and, or just stand there, which is why we want the plans to be reflective. And so I think it's important to note that the UDO and the comprehensive plan were items that were developed prior to me being on council, and so it's hard to be guided by. Okay. I did want to just touch on, I think there was one question. The hours of operation and languages spoken in the development center, because I think that's important for the public to understand as well.
Sure. We are open every day, Monday through Friday, 9 to 3. And we have primary staff does speak English. However, through our language line service, we are able to connect folks and translate to, I forget how many, it's like 200 languages or something like that. We also have native and bilingual Spanish speakers in the department. And often when they are there, we prefer to reach out to them and have them interact as opposed to doing the phone or kind of video interface. It just feels a little more personable to be able to have a live person there. So sometimes that happens as well.
Thank you. That's all my questions and comments.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem, do you have anything? No? Okay. Councilmember Johnson?
Thank you, and thank you, Sarah. This is really helpful. I kind of want to post this entire thing to Twitter. Maybe Leo and I will take turns posting screenshots of the presentation. I wanted to ask you whether there are things in the upcoming, I'm sure there are, what things in the upcoming UDO rewrite do you anticipate bringing forward to specifically help with the issue of affordability? There are, a million things that we need to do, but given that, we're trying to figure that affordable housing is one of the most pressing things we're trying to figure out, and during this deep dive series, what pieces of that, or in the comp plan, just what do you think might lead us towards policies that would help us get more affordable housing?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's one of the reasons that we wanted to have someone, a consultant. Sometimes when you're too close and you've been looking at something for too long, you stop seeing, you miss things, right? And so we wanted to have a fresh set of eyes to help us do that kind of critical deconstruction, like what is really, we just recently started having some projects take advantage of the affordable housing bonus, which in addition to, I know Attorney O'Toole covered it in his presentation, we're allowed by charter to give a density bonus and other things of value, right? So we also essentially give a parking bonus. You don't have to provide parking for affordable units. We give a height bonus. So we give some other things in the ordinance. But even with all that, we really don't get a lot of takers. And we have tried, those of you that have, may remember, we've revised the bonus several times, each time trying to make it a little more appealing, a little more enticing, but we still are not really getting a lot of takers. And we suspected that that was going to be the case early on. It's a problem that is more than just land use can fix, right? But land use regulation contributes to it. And so that's one of the things that I'm actually looking forward to, maybe getting some fresh ideas and getting some folks that have done some work in other parts of the country that maybe have been more successful and can bring us an additional body of research. We often hear folks say, the process is too expensive or too long and time is money. And those are certainly things that we can adjust. We already prioritize in the development review process affordable housing projects. So that's not projects that are proffering donation, projects that are actually proposing and building units. We provide those a priority review that's quicker than other things. So just like we do for a few other specific types of development. So we've done that. We need to be careful, of course, because some of the things that have been asked of us by the development community are not things that we are able to do by law. So for instance, and I think that this was talked about before, there may be, we can't waive a fee, right? And so we need to look at other ways if a fee is a barrier to try and get folks across the finish line so they can build a project. But I don't have a direct answer for if I had the magic answer, we'd be in a lot better place, but I don't. So that's one of the things I'm looking forward to diving in a little deeper myself.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that a lot as well. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are more things that we can do. I'm sure a lot of the things that people want us to do, as you said, are not doable as well. But the intersection of the things that we can do and the things that are doable, I'm hoping is very significant, and we can move forward with some of those things. The density bonus is one of the things that, yeah, I mean, since I've been on council, I think we've changed it 3 times, and we still have not, been able to get people to really jump on that. Yeah, which is disappointing. But we're dealing with market pressures. We're dealing with, profit-motivated developers. Like there's a lot of things that are out of our hands. But I'm hopeful that this process will allow us to, make whatever changes that are in our hands to do our part to try to, create as much affordability as we can.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Williams, then the mayor, and then Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. I think Councilmember Johnson just hit the nail on the head with my main question. What can we do, and how big can we do it? So I'll ask the smaller questions. In regards of the source of funding for planning, the planning department, is that just solely development fees or application fees, or is there, how do we fund this effort?
The planning department is funded, essentially 1/3 of our funding comes from fees, from fee revenues, and another 1/3 from the city general fund, and another 1/3 from county general fund. So that's essentially how the breakdown works.
Okay, thank you. Well, maybe this is my biggest question. We are, just community members who run for office, and we say, hey, I want to fight for my community. We want to stand up and represent da-da-da-da-da. And we have all the ideas in the world because we're the smartest people ever. And then we run for office, and we get here with a reality check. And it's all opinion until we understand what the heck we're talking about. do we foresee any type of metric that could give us any type of metric of guidance or any type of guidelines that can help us, whether we on planning commission or council or board of adjustments, or just any type of, I don't want to drive by and say, wow, look at the grass, it's high. The city doesn't care about us. You know, is there anything when these cases are coming before us, a metric that helps us, you know, assess whether we should, you know, whether we should pass it or not? You know, like I'm going to base my assessment logically based on these parameters.
So that really is the purpose of the comprehensive plan, right? And we're in the weird kind of in-between right now where we don't have, we have a very limited comprehensive plan. When the goals and objectives for the new one were adopted, along with that came a rescission of all but 3 policies. I had to check and make sure I was holding up the right number of fingers. 3 policies from the old comp plan. So all the other policies no longer exist. So we're in this weird phase right now of the only guidance are these very broad overarching goals and objectives. And you'll see that in our staff report, we try and do our best to say how it meets it, but they're broad. And so that's not a lot to go on. When the comprehensive plan is finally finished, it will have, I think, just under 200 policies. Of course, not all of them will apply directly to a rezoning, for instance, but it will be very clear which ones do, and the staff analysis will reference those, and that is something that you all can use to kind of, inform your thinking. Of course, again, it's just policy guidance. It's not, required to be adhered to, but that's the idea.
Thank you. And lastly, in your opinion, do you foresee the comprehensive plan keeping up with the trends of our growth?
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's really important about that is we, unfortunately, we're not able to update the comprehensive plan fast enough, right? And so what we've seen happen is there's a big lag time. Our old comp plan is way out of date, right? It was adopted in 2005. And it had a minor amendment, a few minor amendments done to it, but nothing substantial. So typically it's best practice to update your comprehensive plan every 5 years, like do a whole full update, which we're far behind. So our plan moving forward is to do more regular updates at 2-year intervals so that we don't get behind. So you will see that as one of the administrative policies that is in the plan, recommending that that is the interval that we do that at.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilwoman Caballero. I just want to spend a couple of moments, Sarah, and thank you for all the work that you all are doing in your department, trying to get a feel for what I've been hearing from the community probably since running in the election, and then as Councilman Williams said, once you get here, then you're kind of faced up with the reality of trying to learn a system and put in context the things that we've heard. So kind of 2 areas I want to try to delve in. And when I've talked to the development community, one of the things that I have heard over and over again is the amount of time that it takes for a project to move through the planning process. And along with that there's the secondary part of that is that supposedly in many instances we are slower than other communities around us. And I'm just wondering, how do you dispel that perception with, are there ways that one can measure yourself in terms of timing with other counties, and whatever parameters there are? Are there actually measurements or ways that we could do that to see if that's a myth or if there's some truth to that? Because I can't ever seem to get past that. It's Durham really moves slow in comparison to other counties. It takes 2 years, and if they would just do something about the timing, we may be able to deal with some of the affordability issues. So how do we address that in a community, for instance, with the auditor, the audit department being audited by outsiders who come in and say, okay, they're doing well? Is there a counterpart or something similar that the planning department can use to assess its timing in regards to that?
So, Mayor, that is one of my favorite questions that I get. If you'll recall, all the different processes that I showed on the slide, they have different review timeframes, right? So for something really simple, it might be a 5-day review, right? For something more complicated, like a big site plan or a rezoning, the initial review may be 3 weeks, right? At that point, applicants get 90 days, or in some cases 180 days by law, to resubmit, to make those corrections and resubmit to us. When it comes back in, staff does another 2-week review, so shorter review than the first time around. And that cycle continues to repeat until they have addressed all the technical comments. So we do track how long it takes staff, whether staff is on time with those reviews. And it's very common for me to receive, complaints from folks, why is my project taking so long? So one of the first things I do is I pull the data. It was in staff's hands these many days. It was in your consultant's hands for, these many weeks, months, et cetera. And that is, there's a lot of factors involved in that, right? I'm not trying to kind of throw consultants under the bus as a general thing. There's a lot of work right now, and I think a lot of folks are in the private sector just kind of tapped out. And so they're not doing as great a job as they used to on submittals because they're just trying to keep, all their balls juggling for their clients. We've seen the quality of submittals has really dropped in the past few years. And so that means more re-reviews. Folks are, a lot of times, they're maxing out their time frame to resubmit. They're asking for extensions sometimes. Sometimes weird things happen in a case, particularly like rezoning cases and annexation cases. There's a lot of ownership issues. You all saw some of that play out last night. And so some of that is outside of staff's control. And then there's also kind of the practical nature of there's a finite number of public hearing slots that we can, calendar things for. And honestly, we are having kind of the highest caseload that we've had for a number of case types, including rezonings, in a long time. So all those things together kind of put the perfect storm, but we certainly do track the amount of time that a project, you really have to look at how much time it was in staff's hands versus in the consultant's hands. And it may take 2 years, but if there was only 3 staff reviews, that's really only, maybe 3 months total in staff time? And the rest is, stuff that goes on in the consultant world with their project. So it's a little bit of a complicated question. We have been looking, honestly, at some ways that we can potentially streamline some things. For instance, on rezonings, we no longer continue the re-review cycle until a project is completely clean, because they do have to come in for site plan. So we basically, 2 or 3 reviews, and that's it. You're going to council. Ready or not, here you come, right? And that has helped some. That has also made the problem worse because we have more cases that are ready to be heard now. So did that answer your question?
Yes, I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of address that in this public space so that folk kind of that we all begin to understand. And it's a little bit more complex than making blanket statements. The second part of it, or the other end, and of course, as governments, we are used to bearing the brunt of the paying for all things wrong and making all things right. So wanted to kind of pivot to the community end, and the things that I've heard in the community is, the perception that somehow or another our planning department is pro-development, and all of these things that are being built are basically because somehow or another it's being done from your office, or if not at your office, at the city council level. So, when you talk to people, it's like, wow, we keep talking about walkable communities, but we really don't have them. We're watching, I think one of the emails I got last week was in reference to, we don't want to look like New York. We're watching all these apartments go up, and we don't want to look like New York, and all of these buildings are being torn down. We're losing public hardware, we're losing Los Primos, and what are you all doing to kind of stop these things? And you're building for the people that are coming into Durham, and you're not caring about people who are already in Durham. And why is it that we don't have more retail approved? Just kind of all of these blanket kinds of statements that are coming in from the community in. And I just wanted to give you a space to kind of talk about some of that in terms of how, how we're seeing what we're seeing, and how that kind of plays out, and a lot of it being kind of out of our hands.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions about planning in general. We try to be visionary and put ideas forward with the community about what this place could look like in some future, but we cannot dictate that. And land use in general in this country is set up with a lot of by right provisions, right? There's this really popular thing in this country called property rights. And so if you've got, if your property is zoned, however your property is zoned, if you want to do something that conforms with that, that's your right to do so. Like I said earlier, we have a lot of folks that have reached out to us and you all, oh, how can this possibly be approved? You evil planning department, this should really go before council. Well, not everything can go before council. And so, staff has worked with our elected officials of the past and will continue to do so to right size the things in the ordinance that really rise to the level of approval of this body versus what can be administratively efficiently handled as a by right approval. The idea that never brings any consolation to anybody, but is the truth, is that at the time the rules are written in the ordinance, right, there's a public hearing. And all that is aired publicly in terms of what the rules are going to be and what people may expect to see in the future. The problem with that is that it's really hard for the average person to understand what these rules mean and how they might play out. One of the things that I want to look to do in this next rewrite of the UDO is to break it down into easier to understand language in general, so the ordinance itself is not so dense. I mean, the ordinance confuses some of my staff. That's not helpful, right? But I want it to be more plain language, easier for the average person to understand, so it's more clear what we might see in the future. We're also going to be doing a much deeper job of engagement. I was actually on the team of folks when the current UDO was adopted back in 2006. I had phone duty, y'all, taking questions literally day and night for a couple of months, myself and Mike Stock, answering all sorts of questions from the community because we sent a letter to every single property owner in the entire county. Whew, talk about exhausting. But we really did not do the type of engagement I think that we will, that's expected today, right? We've evolved in terms of considerations about equity, considerations about accessibility of our regulations. So I'm hoping that this time around, we'll be able to do a better job in reaching and educating folks as to what they may see. But again, it's really challenging because it's dense, boring stuff.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Councilmember Caballero, and thank you, colleagues, for this excellent conversation. Thank you, Mayor, for putting this deep dive into our culture. Firstly, I want to say I think I've been on the Joint City County Planning Committee since I've been on council, and in just a few more weeks I'll be chair of it. So I've sat through a lot of primers on planning. This by far is one of the best, most accessible primers on planning. I'm talking about me. I don't want to say planning for dummies, but I'm the dummy. So this is one of the most accessible, and my colleagues were kind of joking about putting it on Twitter, but that may be something you really should consider. This is one of the best. So thank you for this. Councilmember Johnson jogged my memory about something when she asked about something that we can tangibly do. And I want to talk about a resident citizen generated initiative that's going on that the JCC's been talking about, JCCPC's been talking about. But firstly, with respect to us taking our time in Durham, and these developers ain't loyal, because they say the same things. I talk to colleagues from around the country all the time, and they say the same thing. Y'all should be more like Durham. When they're talking to Durham, you should be more like Raleigh and Charlotte. I hear the same thing from all of our colleagues. When you're trying to get that bag, no time is quick enough for you. The other thing, Durham's not fast food. You want to compare us to other cities, they ain't hot like us. Part of our backlog is because everybody wants to be here. We are it right now. So that's why there's a line. You call a hot restaurant, they tell you the reservation is, and this isn't an excuse, and I'm glad that you're still working on efficiencies and working on streamlining it, but the reality is many of them, not all of them, say the same thing to everybody. And secondly, Durham's hot. Ain't nobody coming to see you, Otis, in these other cities. So that's who we are right now. To Councilmember Johnson's point, a question, a query about what's being done. Councilmember Williams, I remember you asked a question about NPOs that are these things that are resident and citizen driven and initiated. Oftentimes the best ideas come from them. There's a group now that has put forward some text amendments to the UDO to relax the ability of faith, houses of faith and worship, places of worship, to use land that they're not using to do affordable housing. One of the things these places, because of the relaxed taxation statuses and not-for-profit statuses of these institutions, many of them have large pieces of land that are just sitting there. And there are some residents and citizens that are moving to relax conditions around them to do affordable housing on large tracts of land. So that's something that I would ask my colleagues to be on the lookout for coming down the pipeline. This has nothing to do with dogma or their teachings or whatever. This is purely using land that they hold to do affordable housing and to ease some of the supply pressures we have in the city. So that's one thing specifically that we can look to that again didn't come. It's not an idea that came from the government, but an idea coming from residents and citizens. So I would just put that on my colleagues' radar as we look at rewriting the UDO and look at creative, new, fresh initiatives and ways we can deal with affordable housing in our city. Thank you so much. This is a great presentation. I appreciate you. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Freeman?
Thank you, Councilmember Caballero. I did, just hearing some of my colleagues' comments, I did want to just circle back a little bit on one of the things you mentioned was a priority review for units. I do want to make sure that there's a unit minimum or some type of percentage tied to that, because I don't think that if you add 1 unit or 6 units or 4 units, it should be tied to however many units that you can, kind of put in some way, shape, or form, whether it's 5, 10, or 15%. And that's just my opinion. I think my colleagues will have to weigh in on that. And I do think that faith and ministry or relaxing of zoning is a great idea, especially for affordable housing. I would add that additional services might be around homelessness or other services that are provided to our community that are of benefit, or childcare. I did note that during COVID, I know that we did add an additional meeting previously, and it may be time to do that just to clear the queue out, because I do know that sometimes it does get backed up, and where we've had 2 years of a shutdown, I think it's important to note that this is specifically a different situation, not just a general backing up. So if we do need to figure out a date, I think we've been doing this Tuesday off of, the Monday off. If we need to figure out a Tuesday that works, I think that's a good way to kind of clear your queue. A Tuesday evening that works, that would be helpful, so that you have the public hearing and hear the cases in the same way we do on Monday. And then it probably would be helpful to see what it looks like on the revenue side, that 1/3. If there's a way to, I don't know if our finance department could flag for us in our, I guess in our budget review, I think for Q2, what that looks like, because if we are off, if we're not having development funding coming in enough, then we need to do something, then we need to know that. I think that would be helpful in our budget conversation. And one more thing was, can you encourage team submissions for the RFP that you're doing for the UDO, or break out the community engagement aspects so that we can get some of the smaller, more local, homegrown folks involved in that work, because I think that's been helpful in some of the work that's happened. That's all. Thank you.
Can I chime in on that? It's been our intent to do a separate RFP for the engagement. So, it's one thing to have technical experts that know how to write code and can dive into research, but usually they are not the same folks that have deep expertise in really engaging a local community. And so our plan is to do that separately, but have them work together. So.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, I have a couple, or just some comments. First of all, great presentation. I really appreciate all my council colleagues' comments and questions. I just wanted to say that I am married to someone who very much knows a lot about the planning department, and I will say that he works across the state, and he always has a very high opinion, and I just want to extend a lot of gratitude for staff for the professionalism extended. I have overheard plenty of Zooms in my house, and I know that there's sometimes some snarkiness out in the community, but I do want to say that we have some top-notch staff in Durham, and we should extend some gratitude, because we've had a lot of vacancies in this department. Durham is not a cheap place to live. I know we're struggling across the city fulfilling some of these vacancies because folks can't move and buy a house here anymore, even on a planner's salary, which is a pretty good job. And so for our residents, we're all struggling with the growth. We all, have nostalgia about how things maybe were and how things are changing quickly. But we do owe it to our staff to acknowledge their expertise and their great customer service. So I just want to applaud you and all of your staff. I hope that my colleagues who are much better at Twitter than I am decide to stick this out there, because it was a great tool. And I look forward. I do think the UDO needs to be not the way it is right now, so that folks can really understand it and feel, more a part of what the built environment in Durham looks like. Thank you, and I hope you and your family have a good Thanksgiving.
Thank you. You as well.
Unless anyone else has any questions or more comments, I think this presentation is done, and I will pass the mic back.
Thank you, Council.